Hey, Justin Dyson here, Dyson Apiaries. Thanks for tuning in to part 2 of how do we store supers for winter. Stick around with us. So during part 1 we talked about how do we get the supers cleaned up after we extracted them because they're still wet with honey. So the method we showed was just stacking them back up on the bees, and here the bees have had a couple days now, and they would have gone up in here and they've gotten all that honey cleaned up, and they've probably repaired the wax a little. In contrast, when we stack them out a distance from the apiary and let the bees just rob them out, a lot of times we end up with a so we set them down on this board here. We stack the supers up out in the apiary. We end up with a pile of wax down here. But the cool thing about stacking them up is on the bees is that they kind of recycle that wax and they'll repair the comb, and it'll be good and ready for next season. So as we all know, 1 pound of wax equals 8 pounds of honey. So we're doing away with a lot of honey production when we're rebuilding that wax. So as much, if you're running a kind of a smaller operation, or you can stand to, it's great to stack them back up on the bees and let them just recycle that wax and put it back to use and get those combs repaired back. If you're running a big operation, I understand, and we do the same thing a lot here. We'll just stack them out in the apiary and let them clean them up. So when we get ready to take them off, one of the things to consider is how we're going to store them over the winter. And you always want something on the bottom that's sealed up. So what I have here is just an inner cover that I've taped up the hole in. We like to keep the bottom closed up because in the winter mice and things like that will come up in the bottoms and they'll make nests in your comb and make a mess. So we need to have something solid on the bottom. So I stack them up on a pallet because I don't like to pick them up again. But now we're just going to run down through here. We're going to take all these supers off. I'm just going to quickly shake the bees out. I'm not going to make sure I have every bee because typically most of the bees up here in this upper part are bees that have been out of the hive at least at some point in their life, so they know where their hive is. So if I just kind of shake them out in front of the hive and then let them sit here for just a minute, those bees are going to come on out of those supers and fly back to their hive. So we don't have to worry about getting every single bee out like we would if we were extracting and taking those honey supers into our honey house, where we really wanted to get the bees out so we didn't end up with piles of bees in our honey house. So I'm just going to yank these supers off real quick, and then we'll talk about the actual storage part. I'm going to give them a good amount of smoke here, just to kind of get them, honestly, just to kind of get them stirred up so they'll get to moving, because I don't want these bees in here. So we've taken the supers off at this point, and as I was talking about, the bees really tidied them up nicely. If you remember what the comb looked like after it was uncapped, it's just kind of ragged. And you see those combs are nice and ready for next season. So that's one of the reasons I like to put them back on. Now, how do we store them? So, of course, it's good to keep them out of the weather, but one of the old methods that's been around for decades is to stagger stack them. And the reasoning behind this, of course, the trouble with winter storage is we have to deal with wax moths. If it's just plain wax and there's nothing in there, there's no honey, there's no pollen, anything, the wax moth really doesn't have anything to survive on. So we don't have a lot of concerns. But a lot of people will still stagger stack them like this, and the reason for that is the sunlight goes in and the wax moth doesn't like to lay its eggs into direct sunlight. Now, if we recall in part 1, I showed you a few frames that had a lot of pollen in them. We see all these dark spots in here. It's pollen, right? That's troublesome because that's pure protein, right? For our wax moths that can live on them. So that's when we have to take some additional precautions. So we're dealing with wax moth. There's one of the things, it's called paramoth. That's one of the preventatives. And what we do with it is after we've gotten all of our supers stacked up, we would just, I think it's like 3 ounces of the stuff. You put it like a paper plate down on your topmost super and you sprinkle about 3 ounces on top, and that kind of sort of fumigates the supers and keeps the wax moth, the adult wax moths, from coming in and laying the eggs. So when we're stacking them up, and I'm just out here right now just showing you, but I put them up in a shelter for the winter, but you know, we just want to make sure that we stack them on something solid at the bottom, of course. You can do some additional preventatives like putting a piece of newspaper between each super if you wanted to. You don't have to do that, it's up to you, but it may prevent some interchange between the supers if you're not using like a paramoth or something like that. But just stack them up, make sure they're nice and straight and sealed up. And we're going to make sure that we have another solid lid on top that's nice and closed. And now they're ready for storage. Now keep in mind, I just took these supers off a few minutes ago. I'll probably leave these sitting out for another day maybe, because there might be a little scattering of honey here and there. So for those, I'm gonna let them sit out another day out in the open, away from the apiary, let the bees kind of clean up a little bit of remnants. When that's over, I'm gonna stack them up. Now we were talking about the pollen earlier. If you have 1 or 2 frames that have some pollen scattered in them, if it's just a little bit, say like that frame, it's no big deal. Wax moth's not gonna survive long on that. If you have one like that other frame I showed you, if you just have a few of them, stick them in the freezer, keep them for the winter. Otherwise, you may have some problems, especially in the early winter when it's not a hard freeze, and in the early spring. That's when the wax moths come out. You don't have to worry about them in December and January, you know, as long as you don't have an extended 3 or 4 days of warm weather. But you'll have to worry about that when it's not a hard freeze. So you may want to use that paramoth solution or freeze those few frames if you have them. Keep a check on them. Go back and check them throughout the winter. Make you a reminder in your calendar to go check them every 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe put those particular frames in one super at the top or something like that, where you can quickly get to them, check them, make sure we're not having some larva, wax moth larva damage beginning. If we do, we need to take action, get those frames frozen before it extends and makes a mess of all your frames. That's pretty simple how we take care of that. It's like I said, we're just stacking them up nice and tight, keeping a check on them, using the preventative if we need to, like the paramoth, for example. Newspapers if you care to, making sure all the honey's out of them, letting the bees clean them up. That's really all there is to it. So guys, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video informative. If you would like to see more and get notified when I put out new videos, make sure you
press that like button and sting that subscribe button. Bye guys! Bye.